When you start living with the end in mind, everything starts to change. What are people going to say about you? What message is your life going to speak when you're long gone? Because you weren't born by accident. You didn't just happen to be where you're at and happen to watch this video. There is always a reason.
Good evening. So I'm super excited. This is Fuse Life Podcast 146, but this is the first episode of Raw Talk, which I'm really, really pumped about. Robbie and I have now been friends for a while, and one of the coolest things that I love about our connection is that we take time to travel from either side of the country, well, we used to from a bigger distance, to meet in the middle. And like he was saying before, like we never run out of conversation, you know, we never run out of things to explore and things that we feel God showing us, Papa showing us. And Robbie, I'm excited, man, to do this with you.
Thanks, Joseph. I really just wanted to start off by saying, man, I honor you, bro, because anyone who walks in the shoes of a guy like Joseph and has the kind of calling that you have faces a lot of dishonor and a lot of resistance and a lot of hardship and a lot of people saying all sorts of things. And, you know, like, we don't need to focus on all of that. But, bro, I want to honor the impact you've had on my life, on the lives of people in New Zealand, and on the lives of people all around the world. And I want you guys to know, all of you who are watching, that Joseph in person is even better than he is on the internet. Like, he is the man. The way he hangs out with his wife and his kids, and as a father, as a friend, like, bro, you're the real deal. So huge honor to you, man. And yeah, I'm up for whatever you want to talk about. Let's do it.
Man, thank you. And obviously, you know, I feel the same for you. So
yeah,
bro, I want to go straight into it, and I want to go straight into the subject of wealth. I think it's horribly misunderstood by a lot of believers. And so why don't we kick off there? Just your thoughts on that, man. Like, you've been in the church circle, you've been around, you know, typical Christianity for a long time, and you are a man who's anointed for wealth in a bigger scheme than most, right? You're like a kingdom economist, kingdom funder. So your thoughts on that, and we can go from there.
Yeah, man. I think when it comes to the subject of wealth, like, I've been pondering a lot, and probably for many years, but specifically more recently on, you know, the story of the prodigal son. It tells us a lot. And everyone focuses on the rebellious son, you know, who takes his father's money and runs. But no one talks a lot about the other dude. And I think why I love that story is because I've had so many conversations with people who are in exactly that spot. So what spot? What do I mean by that? People who are positioned in the Father's house, like, they're in their hearts, they feel like they're there, but yet they live disconnected from the provision that exists for them in the Father's house. And so it's interesting in that story, as you get this guy, he turns up to work on time, he works hard, he does what he's told, like, he's faithful, he's loyal, he's hardworking, he pulls his weight, and yet he, like, just builds this massive frustration, and finally one day just blows up at his father. And what's interesting, bro, is like that, like, as Christ is telling the story, he's trying to demonstrate the heart of the Father. And the thing I find fascinating is that the Father doesn't actually go out of his way to correct this false perspective. He allows him to live with his false perspective. And what do I mean by a false perspective? A perspective that's a mismatch from the Father's perspective, whom he's around every day. And the mismatch of perspective is literally this: everything that's mine has always been yours. And so the son was operating from this perspective of, I do not have access to what belongs to the Father. And yeah, bro, like, the more I think about it, is the Father's wealth is literally infinite. Like, it's an infinite access to an abundance, an immeasurable amount that never runs dry. And so the question is, do we actually have access? And this guy was waiting for something or someone outside of himself to unlock something in his life. And so he ended up in a place of lack and frustration and disappointment and blame. And I think secretly, many of us have been there. Like, if you were to truly look at yourself in the mirror and be honest with yourself and not lie to yourself, have we been there before? I know I have.
Yeah,
So
me too.
yeah, I mean that's just an initial thought, man.
Yeah, and he ends up bitter and jealous against his own brother when he sees
Yeah.
what he deems to be undeserving with the party that he sees happening for his brother. But it's interesting what you said, and maybe I bunny trail a little bit here on how the father allows him to come to that realization by
Yeah.
exposing his heart. And it
Yeah.
seems like even Jesus, with all these encounters he has, he allows people's hearts to be exposed, and then he brings an alignment, you know? Like
Yes.
the disciples go cast out demons, they come back, they're full of pride, and then he corrects them because now it's been exposed. We see that with the rich young ruler. It's like he
Yeah.
allows the exposing to happen so that we would know what's in our hearts, right? And so I think that when we look
So
at
true, bro.
exposing from the heart of a father, it's actually an act of mercy and love that allows exposing to then bring this realignment, you know? But when you talk about the son, I've thought about that guy a lot because
Yeah.
I was 6 days a week in the church, right? 2 church services, prayer meeting, worship leading, youth pastor, home group. Like I'm like, you know, and that culture is there that, well, I'm doing all the right things and maybe God will see that and give me something, you know?
Yeah.
But you're talking about how we have access already. Well, why aren't we accessing it? What do you think?
Bro, because we've been programmed to take instructions. We've been programmed to think that taking an instruction is the highest form of loyalty as a son. And changing gears now to a different story, when you look at the story of the talents, the master leaves them, like it says he leaves them, right? And again, the kingdom of heaven is like, that's the words of Jesus. That's what he says. This is what the kingdom is like. So he's trying to get into our heads a story of this is what the kingdom is like. You're going to be left to think for yourself and do 2 things: take initiative and take risks. And the guys who took initiative and took risks were rewarded, and they were promoted. And the guys who didn't take initiative and who didn't take risks weren't rewarded. And so the son, tracking back to the son, he didn't take the initiative, he didn't take the risk, he didn't utilize access that he had all along, because in his mind he didn't have it. So as believers, we've often been programmed to believe that the highest form of sonship is taking instructions. And Jesus never said, I only do what the Father tells me to do. He never said that. A lot of people, I've heard people say that Jesus said, I only do what the Father tells me to do. He didn't say that, because that's what a slave does. That's a slave mentality. He said, I do what I see the Father doing. So in other words, he took the initiative to look, see, behold, and examine what the Father is doing in another dimension, and then took the initiative and the action based on what he observed. It's a totally different thing. So, yeah. What are your thoughts, bro? Like, what do you think?
Do you think that it is like when you're a child, you get instruction and you need some instruction, it keeps you safe. But as you're maturing, that starts to change. Like when we look at our natural children, like my 8-year-old now needs a lot less instruction. She has a lot more initiative. She has a lot more of her dreams and her goals wanting to come out. And we have this beautiful interchanging of ideas and where we get to share what we'd like to do together. But it feels like in church culture, we're like almost, it's wrong to do that. Like you don't get a say. You can't initiate. You have to only respond to an instruction because you're not that special.
That's true, bro. Like, that's true. And I guess I've observed this from a different perspective, because it's probably been quite a long time since I've been in church settings. So I'm like, my memory of some of that is kind of like wearing out now. But what I do see it is as the fruit and the people who are stuck, who come and knock on my door. And I'm like, okay, let's look at the fruit of your life. Let's look at the position you're in. Let's look at where you're at. what has led you to this point. And usually as we uncover, discover, and recover, like a little bit of a saying that I've got, let's uncover it, let's discover it, and let's recover from that. As we go through this process of kind of like untangling, like, how did you get to this point? Often it is those beliefs like, yeah, I can't take initiative. I have to just take instruction. I'm reactive. I'm not proactive as a son. I'm always reacting to some kind of an instruction rather than going, hang on, what are the possibilities in front of me? And which one of those makes the most sense? And how can I go all out at that? And that sounds almost like, yeah, what's the word? Like for a lot of people, that feels wrong. And it feels like I have to, the only good thing is things that come from God. But if you're, someone even said to me the other day, well, it says that the heart is incredibly wicked. I'm like, yeah, but which heart, the old one or the new one? Because it says we've been given a new heart. And so we have an inherent distrust towards anything that comes from ourselves. And I would say, is that a godly belief or an attitude? And from my perspective, absolutely not. Because I heard Bill Johnson say the other day, he said, so, I used to pray none of me and all of you. And then God showed me that actually he had that before and he wasn't happy with that. And that's why he created me. And I was like, that's such a good way of saying it. But for some reason, we have that corrupt belief and that belief of low self-esteem and a low value for anything that derives from ourselves. It's a religious thing. It's just a demonic religious belief, is my view. But how do you see it, bro? What do you think?
Mine too. Like religious belief, religious ideologies, which are rooted in pride, so I can feel good about what I'm doing, and it sounds really holy, and I make myself appear to be, something amazing, and I totally agree with that. Coming back to this parable of the talents and the minas, and the master gives them this freedom with resource to go and make it happen. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit, because so many people are scared in decision making, right? As a coach, my last 4 or 5 years, this is one of the things I see not just once, but over and over again show up in people's lives, where they're scared to do the wrong thing. And what if it's just me? Joseph, yes, I do this with God, but what if it's just me? They have this fear of what's given to them and stewarding it and multiplying it and governing that. Do you want to talk on that a little bit? That fear?
Yeah, well, bro, like there's so much we could talk about here. We could probably spend the rest of the call just on this subject, but I love how you've observed that. And yeah, I just to comment on you and your process, you're such a master on picking that up and like you said before, pushing that trigger point and getting to the heart of it. And you've even done that with me and with Jazz at times, which is so epic. But what I love about this discussion is you're bringing things from your real life coaching experience where people get super vulnerable and open up about challenges and struggles. And I am coming from that exact same place, which very few people actually have that privilege and responsibility to have people open up to them to that extent. And like, it gets super vulnerable. And so, yeah, just for everyone watching, when we are speaking about this stuff, both Joseph and I, it's coming from that place of having, bro, what it's like, hours and hours and hours and hours of discussions with clients over sometimes years. Like some of the people I've worked with for years, and it's such an uncovering process. But, to your question, one time when I felt so useless and worthless, which has happened at times during my life, but when I felt so useless to God and to humanity and to everyone, I had Jesus say to me, don't you know that you are perfect? He came to me in this encounter, and those were his words, and he looked me right in the eye and he said, don't you know that you're perfect? And I did not feel perfect. But I want everyone who's watching, ask yourself this question. And if I was to ask you this question, are you perfect? Put your hand up if you say yes, and don't if you say no. And it's actually not a trick question. And if the answer to that question is no, it means the reference point of who you are is coming from the wrong place, because the true you, the real you, is born again from above, a new creation, seated in Christ in heavenly places, joined to the Lord, one spirit with him. So if you ask yourself this question, am I perfect? and the answer is no, you have come into alignment with the lie. If the answer is yes, and I felt so uncomfortable with that, Joseph. Like when he said that to me, don't you know you're perfect? I realized that I really didn't believe that. So our primary form of existence, because we've got multiple forms of existence, our spirit being, we don't have a spirit, we are a spirit. So that's who you are. You have a soul and a body. You know, as my friend and mentor Ian would always drill into everyone, you don't have a spirit. He'd say, you know, I felt my spirit move. No, you didn't, because you are the spirit. That's the part of you that's existed for a very long time and will continue to exist for a very long time. So that is actually who you are. So it's the more you agree with the fact that you're perfect, the more that perfection can be displayed in your genetics and your mindset and your behavior and your attitude and the way you turn up. And so I went through a massive process of repentance around how I viewed myself. So through that, I then could begin to trust myself. Yes, you have to discern when things come from a selfish or a fleshly point of view, but that's not who you are. Like, that's not the truth of who you are. So yeah, but what do you think, bro? How would you answer that?
Well, I like that we're exploring all of this, you know. A lot of my issues actually began like after I got saved. I would have so many conversations with believers who were broke, who needed money, and maybe they'd have a miracle every now and then. Their bills just get paid, or, you know, somehow God showed up in the last minute for them is how it would be shown, you know. So it really built a frustration in me of, God, if you own everything, if you died on the cross for me to redeem and restore all of this, then what's missing? What's wrong here? And so when you talk about this being perfect thing, I also had a problem with that. And in all honesty, I am still fully just allowing that to permeate my soul. You know, I think a lot of us in our soul, our mind, will, and emotions, we don't go through the renewing process, which is that untangling and the uncover, discover, recover in the soul, which is a hard wrestle, you know. And I guess for me, because of so much religious programming, it took a long time to really detach from that kind of thinking. And so working with people, I've seen that to be such a big challenge of not only can I dream freely, but then can I move freely? And if I move freely, is God moving with me? You know, and that fear of, what if I go without him? What if I go the wrong direction? What are some of your thoughts on that? What if I go the wrong direction?
Oh, I love it, bro. I love it. I love it. This is such a good discussion. And I love the honesty too, because I mean, we're all in process, and I think it helps sometimes, like for guys like you and I, to talk like this and be like, dude, I still find myself often having to address stuff that's out of line, and especially my self-image. And it's interesting looking at, you know, a lot of the wealth books I've read, they've said that your level of wealth is often in direct proportion to your self-image. It's really interesting. It's really, really interesting. So, you know, this whole idea of Christ coming to me saying, don't you know you're perfect? He's addressing an issue in my self-image.
Wow.
That the way I view myself isn't in alignment with truth, and I've agreed with the lie. But, you know, to your question of like, how do we feel things out if we're going in the wrong direction? What if I make a mistake? What if I go the wrong? What if I make a wrong decision? What if? Well, firstly, what's that based in? Fear. It's based in fear. Anything that's linked to fear or driven out of fear does not produce the fruit of the kingdom, because it's coming out of the wrong realm. So the very premise of that question suggests, like, what if I do something wrong, is coming from an angle of fear. But the way that it was explained to me is, like, you're a musician, bro. You're a great guitar player and singer, and the way that God said it to me is that walking out your scroll is like this: I set the key, but you play the melody. And so within a certain key, there's 1,000 different ways that you can arrange the notes. And what he was saying to me is, as long as you're playing in time and in key, we're good. There are many different ways in which your scroll or your assignment, whichever language you want to use, can materialize, all of which are really great. There's many different variations, possible variations that your life assignment and purpose can take on, all of which, as long as they're in tune and on time with the key that God has set for your life, then that's great. So for me, as soon as I start feeling this thing's really draining me, there's just all sorts of roadblocks, it's not actually bearing fruit, I don't feel good going to sleep at night, like there's a thing in my heart like, no, this isn't right. I really pay attention to that, because for me, that's the guidance of the Holy Spirit saying, bro, you're playing out of tune right now, and no big deal. Just get back in tune. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, when you're learning to play guitar, you play the wrong notes all the time. But the issue is if you can't hear it and you keep playing stubbornly, like just playing the wrong notes. So I think, bro, let me ask you a question, because you are a master of purpose and you've helped me with my purpose, and the questions you ask are just so brilliant. But what would you say are the common denominators of someone who's stuck, who's poor, who's frustrated, is not getting ahead? Like, what are the common threads or things that you see that lead someone to that point?
You know, people talk about intimacy all the time, and I almost don't want to use this word because it's been so religionized and churchified. But like when you think about intimacy, there is a, God, I let you into me see, but then I also into you see. And I think that most people have not taken that freedom to look into him, his desires for you, his desire for mankind, his desire for creation. So there's still a lot of people that I feel live from a religious paradigm of, I will do the right things and I hope it's enough for this God, you know, like in a lot of other religions, like in Islam, there's you pray 5 times a day, pointing a certain direction, but you never know, you're never certain of where you stand with your God, you know. At no point are you 100%. And I feel like because we come in with this religious paradigm, we don't know his heartbeat. We don't know how to let him bring the key. We don't know how to be in tune and rest in that, you know. I could go a little deeper here. You know, when a baby is born, the first 1,000 days of a baby's existence, this baby is learning 85% of its worldview. And so in that time, this baby needs something that is beyond what most of us think about. Like, I'll give you an example. So we bring Adele home, and I still remember putting her in a car seat and having no idea what to do with her next, right? And this baby, all it can do is just wow, 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 you know. And I've shared this a lot of times in my podcast, but that baby just wears its way for years. And every time it wears, mama shows up, and it starts to, this baby learns this rest, you know, and from that rest, the baby starts moving and learning how to live, but it all begins from that rest. And sadly, I feel like most believers have been born again, but we've not been allowed to learn from rest. We go straight into performing, you know, serve in the church. What can you do? How much are you reading? How much are you praying? And so now the performance becomes the way that we get a seat at the table. And that's why I feel so many people are scared, because if they perform wrong, they're like, well, my seat's going to go and I don't want to lose my seat at the table, you know?
For sure, bro, for sure. Yeah, I love that, man. And I think one of the things that I've noticed, you know, just to add to your point, is like in some of the things that we're involved in, we have people come along and say like, hey, I want to be involved and I can do this and I can do that. And I've got experience in this. And it comes from a really good heart, because they're demonstrating like, hey, I want to come here and serve. But my response to them oftentimes is like, hey, we just want you to be at the table, and your role and function will emerge over time. And it's amazing to see how uncomfortable that makes people feel, because they get a sense of security from like having either a title or a job or a purpose, because we derive our value from what we can or can't achieve in a certain context. And I'm not saying it's all about just being relational and not being productive, but what's been fascinating, Joseph, is watching how when someone's willing to sit at the table and occupy their seat with zero function for a period of time, how all these things will get broken in them in their heart. And then finally, when it's broken, God will turn up and be like, this is your function, because now you're ready for it. So it's interesting too, man, that sometimes you have to lay something down that you're really good at and that you want to do and you're ready to do, and everything in you is just like, hey, I want to go. And it's like, nah, put it down. Because only when you're really okay after putting it down, that's when you actually qualify to pick it up. So it's really interesting, man.
Yeah. So I've noticed that too, right? We're building community. We've been doing this since 2017, these small groups, little ecclesias, whatever term you want to call them. We've been building these, and I've watched so many people come and then go because there's no title, there's no function, there's no role. How about we know each other for our hearts instead of what you can do and what you think you can bring? And I think that the reason we end up having to go through this lay it down so you can pick it up process is because of the pattern that we've been programmed in, you know? Like Romans 12 talks about, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. And that I think includes religion, right? That's the pattern of this world. And we've been patterned to do so that you can have to prove that you are. But when we go back to Genesis 1, it's actually be, and because you are, you will automatically do, and because you do, you will have. So the be, do, have has been switched into the do, have, to be. And so when I come here and I'm playing music because I need to do so that I can have, so I can belong, that has to die so that I can just be. Otherwise, that unhealthy paradigm never brings me into freedom, eh?
That's so good, bro. That's so good. And it's fascinating that once you've walked through that process, how quickly you can pick it up in someone else. You know what I mean? It's like I've had to go through the very thing that you've described. And like, I remember years ago, man, like music being such a big deal to me, too much of a big deal. Like it was such a big thing for me. And I remember having to give away my favorite guitar and my amp, and it broke me, but I did it. And it was, even though it was hard, I knew it was right. And it's interesting now, like all these years later, coming into like that music again, but in a really healthy way. And so, yeah, I love it, man. It's such a, you know, and bringing this back down to wealth, you know, like people say like, oh, you're a prosperity preacher or like all this sort of stuff. I'm like, look, the facts are simple. God is rich and he wants us to be like him. Like, that's just so simple. But the process to rich, man, sometimes you're going to have to endure lack. Sometimes you're going to have to be stuck. Sometimes you're going to have nothing. But all of that is adding to your wealth. All of that is adding to your true wealth. So the guy who Christ challenged and said, hey, go sell all your stuff and give it to the poor. Do you know, bro, that it was actually an invitation into greater riches?
Explain that.
It wasn't an invitation into less. It was an invitation into more. Because, you know, like, what does he say? Store up for yourself, you know, riches in heaven. And so if he had traded what he had, it actually would have unlocked treasures in heaven for him that would have re-manifest on the earth in a greater measure. And so I guess I'm talking from experience of having reached that point of being challenged that the very things that I wanted to hold on to, I was challenged to give away. And not trying to make myself some kind of hero, because I know many people who are believers have reached this point. But getting to that point and being like, yes, I will give it all away. And momentarily you end up with less. So from a physical standpoint, it looks like you've taken a step backwards. But from a heavenly standpoint, you've taken a step forward. And the heavenly reality the earthly reality will always catch up with that heavenly reality. So when Christ said that to him, in his heart, he was holding for this guy, I want you to step into more. He wasn't going, you need to have less. And so people, again, they use that story to justify poverty, but I don't believe that was the intention of Christ at all. Yeah, but anyway, bro, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that would mess with a lot of people. Like, there's generally a fear of having more than enough, of abundance. It's like I was listening to Erwin McManus. You know, I've told you about him.
Yeah.
Mosaic, and his church has a lot of unbelievers that come all the time, and he was talking to them about how when he goes to a new age space, it's like everyone in there believes that the universe is for them. They have so much faith that the universe is so good to them and it's going to be amazing. But when he's around Christians, they're always scared, like, oh man, this is going to be hard. This is going to be bad. We're going to be poor. We're not going to have enough. And he's like, what is our view of God? Like, how do we really think with good God when a new ager is more excited that the universe is going to drop something for them, but God is like not able to, you know?
Yeah, man. And I think when I think of what you're just saying, coming back to the prodigal son story, that his belief overrode the reality. Like, our beliefs are so powerful that his belief determined the reality that he lived in, even though the reality was he had a father that was for him with infinite abundance that he had full access to all along. His belief in who his father was dictated his experience. And so when you say, hey, these new age guys, their belief of God is more accurate than what a lot of believers are, it sounds to me like that's, you know, like that's the kind of thing that Christ would say to the Pharisees, you know? Anyway, but yeah, yeah. So, but the thing was, bro, that his belief determined his experience. So even though his father was good and his father was for him and his father gave him access, his belief was so powerful that it actually programmed his reality. It overrode the truth. Like, bro, that sounds wild to say, but his belief was so, our beliefs are so powerful that they can actually override the truth, not in a general sense, but for us. So in other words, the truth is not experienced in our reality. Our belief overrides the truth. So these guys who have this feeling of scarcity and lack and that God is like out to punish them or whatever, even though that's not true, it becomes true for them because they've empowered that reality through their own false beliefs.
That is interesting, because the guy that buried his one talent had that skewed view of who God is, that you are a harsh taskmaster and you reap where you did it. So, and he had all this stuff he was scared of in terms of who the master was, and it caused him to act a certain way. And
that's right.
I guess that we are all acting based on what we believe God is like and who we believe him to be. And our actions are then leading to these experiences that usually are not favorable. What about your thoughts on, so I heard a guy named Peter Daniels. Have you heard that name?
Yeah, Australian guy, right?
Yeah, Australian guy. And he talked about how when Jesus was born, the gifts that he got from the Magi were not just 3 perfume bottles, but they were worth a lot of money, right? He translates it to something like, I don't know, 400 million or something, if with inflation, something crazy, he translated it. And I guess his reasoning, after all the research, he's like, and that's why Joseph, Mary, and Jesus could hide from Herod for 3 years and travel around and all of that. What can you talk to that a little bit?
Bro, I'm not a historical expert. I'm maybe not the best guy to ask, but it sounds good to me. That sounds accurate. Like, I mean, you know, if he had garments that had, like, what were they, seamless garments, and that those weren't cheap, and then paying for 12 guys to travel around for 3 years, that's not cheap. And yeah, man, like, obviously money wasn't an issue, like what he said with the fish, you know, the coin in the fish's mouth. So I think what's interesting is that there wasn't an acknowledgement of who he was through the measure of wealth right at the start, before he even achieved anything. So there was someone acknowledging who he was, what he carried, and what was on his life. And what's interesting, man, is that some people recognized it, some people resisted it, some people were oblivious to it. You know what I mean? So they're all very different reactions. But whether it was 400 million or not, I don't know, man. Like, that, to me, I don't know if there's a true way of really telling that. But I think, was it a lot of money? Yeah, I think it probably was. But what do you think? What are your thoughts when you hear that?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. I look at Jesus's life, and obviously in the movies we watch, and even in The Chosen, like, there's a little bag with some coins, and that's kind of, you know, but I don't see any mention of Jesus trying to, you know, going out of his way to ask people for money. Yeah, I know people gave him money and people ministered to him that way, but I don't see him ever addressing lack in a way that he's stuck, you know, and he has nowhere to go now, and he needs somebody to really help him out of a ditch. And it just feels like he was constantly demonstrating this ability to live from another realm, from another kingdom, and not always relying on earthly substance either. You know, I find it fascinating that the disciples, it might have been Philip, but the disciples are like asking him when they have to feed the 5,000, one of them is saying, hey, should we go and buy the food? So I'm like, man, how much money would it cost to buy all that food? So
yeah, true.
You know, like, did they have access to this money? Like, and so I've wondered about that a lot. And obviously people twist that scripture, the love of money is the root of all evil, but they just go straight to money is the root of all evil. And it brings so much confusion to people, you know, yet every person will go to work for 40 or 50 hours a week. And if they got a pay rise, they will never say no. But there's these like confusing cognitive dissonance going on in the back of the head, you know?
Yeah, fully, bro. And I wonder how much of that is just convenient because people are comfortable hanging on to what they believe because then it justifies their situation. As soon as they have to take ownership of, hey, actually, this is wrong, what I believed is wrong, it means that they have to make change and they have to take responsibility. So sometimes it's very convenient to have poverty steep beliefs because then it justifies the position that you're in. And it's much more comfortable. It's much more comfortable to adjust what you believe to be true, like, hey, money's bad, it's the root of all evil, and therefore I am poor. How that's very convenient, isn't it? So I think that sometimes it's just a matter of people are too comfortable in their position, and to justify their position, they'll hold on to all sorts of beliefs that don't actually serve them. But if they change their beliefs, it puts pressure on them to act differently, and yeah, that's not always easy.
Yeah.
But bro, let me ask you a question. When you have seen, let's touch on this if we can. When you have seen somebody successfully turn around and go through the massive process of like humility and scanning their beliefs to be like, how did what I believe lead me to be in the position that I'm in? And take responsibility for their thoughts, beliefs, actions, attitudes, habits, etc. Right? All those important things. That, hey, those are the things that led me to where I am, and I don't like where I am. I want to be somewhere different. How often, like, what's your hit rate? Like, how often do you see people really make those changes? And when do you see people not make those changes? And why do they? And why don't they? And like, let's talk about it in a positive sense. Like how, like, let's say I grew up in a poor family and I adopted poor beliefs, and that's not my fault. But now I'm in adult life and I'm poor and I don't want to be poor. But I've actually got these deep-rooted beliefs that are unhelpful, but it justifies where I'm at. And I meet Joseph Wilson, and Joseph's like, all right, let's walk a process. What is it about those people that do actually change? What makes them different?
Bro, this is so deep, right? Like, because there's so many places we can go here. But I will say it starts, like you said, humility. You know, like humility is like, hey man, like my beliefs actually might be wrong here. Like I might be wrong about all my preconceived ideas around wealth and money and people that have wealth. Like one of the ways, those that are listening, one of the ways you know if you have an issue with wealth and prosperity is how you look at people that have it. Like I have had times where I've seen that I just subconsciously start to judge someone who has success or judge someone who's opulent, you know, maybe who has a $5 million yacht. And in my head, well, that's too much. And I start to judge them, and I've had to catch myself to go, whoa, man, why am I judging this? I don't even know this person. How did I so quickly make up a story in my head to feel better about my belief system? So humility is so scary because suddenly you're faced with, I actually don't know everything, and I might be wrong about many things, you know? So finding people that are willing to address that is the hardest part. Because the minute you do that, now you're like, well, if I don't know it, then now what? And you got to explore, you got to move, you got to learn, you can't be comfortable anymore, you know, like you were saying, to your point. And so that's the first thing I've seen shake up someone is when they're finally willing to say, maybe I don't know everything, and now I am open for the journey. The other thing I like to tell everybody is that if we look at this as a journey of a child with a good father, then this whole thing is only about one thing, and that is you maturing. You are maturing into the likeness and the image of his son, right? Romans 8:29. You are maturing into your original intent, which was to be just like him, but you're not performing to try and attain that spot. You can't do that in your own strength. But that is why he is in you and you are in him. And now you are maturing to that point. So there's so much freedom. There's so much rest as you explore the journey, you know? So one of the things that happened actually was a friend of mine who's now like a really good friend, like a brother, came up and he stayed with me for 2 days. And we had these conversations for 48 hours. And they were so frustrating to him. And I could see them grating him. But somewhere he was like, what this guy is saying is right. And it's nothing like what I believe. Will I let it in? And it was like 2 days of grating, man. And I started talking to him about inheritance and how you can just receive this as a free gift from your father. And he's maturing you into bigger and greater things. And he had always worked for his gift, right? He's worked for a reward. And so the process I saw that happened with him was actually, we prayed this prayer. And I said to him, if you pray this, it's a dangerous prayer, right? Father, I give you full permission to father me into my inheritance. You know, and so he prays this prayer, and the next 2 weeks, and I told him everything in your life that is not from dad, that is rooted in your performance and in toil, will be removed so that you can have an amazing garden that you are not trying to sustain, you know. So 2 weeks, man, he messaged me, bro, this is shaking. I lost a client, I lost some money. And he was like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, what does your heart want to do? You want to pursue this with your father or you want to take control? And he's like, no, I'm going all the way, whatever Papa's doing, you know? And in the 3rd week, something flipped. And then suddenly just money started to come to him. Like 5 grand came to him one day. 2 grand came to him the next week, you know? A few months later, he ended up with a tax return of 20 grand that allowed him to buy a caravan, which was something he was talking to father about a lot. So he started to see, oh man, like now I'm living from a different economy. And this economy is not bound by this realm. It's not bound by my toil or my performance, you know? And so that was a really good example for me of watching someone willing to go through that process to come out this other side.
Oh, that's so good. I love that prayer. What was it? I give you permission to father me into my inheritance.
Yeah, Father, I give you full permission. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good, Joseph. That's so good, bro.
You know, I've seen so many people who struggle with something that have a preconceived view of why they should be better. And so they play their own little game and God's not even involved. Like, I'll give you an example of this guy and porn, right? This guy was struggling with porn. And I'm like, well, why shouldn't you watch porn, you know? And his automatic answer is, well, that's the wrong thing to do. So I should stop doing the wrong thing. And the way he was dealing with this issue, he never allowed father into the situation. So it was so hard for him because he'd go days without watching, then he'd watch, be condemned, then he'd try again and again. Yeah. So we began this conversation of what does it look like to bring father into the situation, right? You know, and then he's like, well, how can he love me if I'm doing this, you know? And I'm like, well, he already knows what you're up to, bro. And so many of us have this fear of talking to God about things that he is seeing in our life, things that our heart is already saying, but it's almost like we're scared to just call out the elephant in the room, you know?
Yeah, that's so good, bro. That's so good. That's so good, man. Like, and I think it's exactly in situations like that I have found, you know, whether it's porn or anything else that you're struggling with, that he doesn't want to, for me, necessarily want to talk about the problem. He's like, let's talk about your perfection, because what you focus on and what you talk about and what you have your attention on, that's what's going to, like, there's that, the Hebrew word for iniquity, I believe. It's like, there's a picture for it, an eye, a hook, and then like the seed multiplying. So what that means is what the eye hooks into will multiply within your life. And so if you're always like, I have this problem, I'm so bad, I'm struggling with this, help me with this, yeah, that's fine. Like, raise the problem and let's talk about it. But very quickly, the problem's no longer a problem, because now you're in the presence of the most powerful, infinite being that is full of perfection and purity, and that has given you his nature. And the more you come into agreement with that, the less you're going to be struggling with all this other stuff. But I love that, man. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that focus thing, I think, is such a big deal, you know, and obviously in traditional church settings, it's easy to become so sin conscious and weakness conscious, and you're constantly reinforcing that and then thanking God for getting you out, but you still live in that kind of shadow realm. you know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love that, man. I think that is a big deal. What you focus on, you know, is where your energy goes and what you start seeing happen in your life more and more. So let me ask you this, right? Why do people feel guilty for succeeding? Right, those of you that are watching, have you ever felt this? Have you felt guilty for succeeding? I know people that feel guilty to tell other people their wins, you know, like in my group coaching, we have about 60, 65 people in there. It's not natural for believers to say, guys, I did this week, I'm winning. Like I hit a big deal. I made this much money, or I got a promotion. It's almost like this fear of sharing success, you know. Have you seen much of that? Have you ever had that?
Well, bro, I guess, and I've had the real privilege of growing up in many environments. Like, so have you, you know, and it's a real blessing, and it's been a real challenge as well. It's like a double-sided sword when you get to grow up in a couple of countries and live in a few countries. You get to witness the power of culture and the power of environment, because you get exposed to a whole lot of different environments. And I've personally lived in 4 different countries, and so when you have those 4 perspectives, you get to contrast the different cultures with one another and be like, oh, this is interesting because I didn't notice this in this culture. And in this culture, this has this really bad thing, which doesn't exist in this culture. And this culture has this really fantastic thing, which doesn't exist here. And it's like, I just feel like all cultures have got their pros and cons. Like, bro, there's no perfect culture on earth. And the other thing that I found is that the power of environment to shape our beliefs. And I talk a lot, and you do too, about the inner power that we carry and that we have as sons, because we have the infinite spirit of God within us. So we are all powerful because of that. But also the power of, like you said, the baby's first 100 days, how its environment and external factors shape its beliefs. And so we can't underestimate that dynamic. And I have found, given I'm in New Zealand, just like you are, while New Zealand has tremendous qualities, like many tremendous qualities, one of the poorer qualities is the often stated tall poppy syndrome. And I have found that when I've lived in other countries, like when I was in Canada and when I lived in South Africa, success was generally celebrated outwardly a lot more. Like when I lived in Canada, bro, like a kind of like a common way for business introductions there, I found, was that people would say, this is who I am and this is what I've achieved, because you're building a sense of trust and credibility with the other guy, being like, you know, this is my background and this is who I know and this is what I do. And while some of that can be super overboard from a New Zealander's point of view in some contexts, I find that in New Zealand, people have a tendency to underplay things hugely. So you'll have some super rich guy and he's driving like a Toyota Camry, and he thinks that because of that, he's like a hero or something. It's like, dude, that's just dumb. But I think, you know, to your question, why is success not celebrated? It actually is in a lot of cultures. It's celebrated in American culture. It's celebrated, I don't know, I'm not an expert obviously in all cultures, but there are a lot of cultures where I think success is really genuinely celebrated, where there isn't a feeling of like, well, because this person has more, it means they've taken away from someone else, which is scarcity, finite thinking. Well, we're called to have infinite thinking. So what are your thoughts? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Like, I ended up in the States in 2018 and 2019 3 times. And every time I'd go there, I'd notice how people would talk about their life and how comfortable they were to talk about what they're good at. They're equally comfortable to talk about what they're not good at, but they had no shyness or shame in telling me what they're amazing at. And at the beginning, I was like, whoa, like, you know, what? Are you tooting your own horn? Because to someone who's falsely humble, true humility can seem like arrogance, you know?
For sure,
and when I came here from India, I was 11 years old, and I remember in school, I stopped answering questions because people around me, my students around me would be like, hey, like, you don't have to answer all the time, like, be humble, act humble. And suddenly, like, humility took on this, like, don't shine element, you know? Humility became, to me, just keep your mouth shut, bro. Like, who cares if you know the answer? Like, stop trying to be the man, you know? And so I stopped being me. And actually a guy in my church called me out on it, and it messed me up for a good week of like, man, I think he's right. I'm just pretending to be humble instead of true humility, which is I am who God says I am, full stop, you know? And so American culture really hit that for me, because then when I came back here, I saw it again over here of downplay, don't say too much, don't rock the boat, you know? I'm so afraid if I shine that I'm going to make this person feel dark. Instead of if I shine, they're going to find their light. Where like if I shine, it's like I'm leaving you in the dark. And you know what I mean? I really saw that contrast.
For sure, bro, for sure. And I think tall poppy syndrome, literally, it's just a Cain. Like we saw that very first dynamic between Cain and Abel. When the one brother succeeded, the other brother came and basically killed him. And so I think there's something within us that's driven by either jealousy or whatever else, insecurity, that sees another person's success as a threat. Whatever that thing is, man, like that's pure evil. And the reason I say that is because when I think about you, this precious 11-year-old Indian boy that should have been encouraged and told like, hey man, you've got amazing stuff. We want to hear what you've got to say. Let's go. You were shut down and you were embarrassed. And bro, like it makes me so angry. It makes me so angry. But in saying that, right now I'm reading this book about leadership that draws on the lives of the All Blacks, because I'm like, I want to find the gold in New Zealand culture. Yeah. I know there is gold in this culture. So I don't want to ever make it come across like I'm just bashing New Zealand, because I have a ton of respect for this country. It's given me so much. But in reading this book, it was so interesting reading it, bro, because there is a genuine side of like humility in that as well. It's just when it's taken too far, where you try and shut people down, then like sometimes your strength can become your weakness. You know that? Like, so in this book, bro, it talks about how the All Blacks, they sweep after themselves, like the guys do, not anyone in their team, them, like the actual All Blacks will sweep up after themselves after every game, because they don't expect anyone else to do it for them. And there's just like this thing of like, don't ever think that you're above anyone else. Do those humble jobs. Do those, like, you're not too big to sweep the floor. And so what I'm saying here is I'm honoring New Zealand culture because it's produced the best sporting team, and South Africans might argue with me, but if you go look at the stats, and by the way, I go for South Africa, but I'm just saying statistically, best rugby team that there is, this culture has produced that. So there's obviously some great things within the New Zealand culture, and I've got to talk about that too. So in saying that, like you, I have felt the negative effects of tall poppy syndrome. And I've had to work so hard to overcome it, and sometimes still do. When I see it now, though, it's just one of those things that I know your ugly face and I'm not paying any attention to you. I'm sorry. It's just like one of those things, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, man. When you talk about good things about New Zealand culture, like I think New Zealand as a nation always fights above its weight. We've seen that in so many ways. And Edmund Hillary is another good example of that. And I think there is there is a pioneering spirit in the nation. And I think that's reflected in how many missionaries have gone out from here all over the world, you know, which is
good capita, eh?
Yeah, which is amazing. There's a question here, and I think it'd be good to talk about this this question here. Like, what is success and why is it mostly rated on a financial level? I think that's a good question, Sean. Thank you for bringing that up.
I'll let you tackle that one first, bro.
No, man, I think we're going to go. So just some of my thoughts here on this. Like, success to me it's very personal, and I think it's directly related to who God has made you to be, your scroll, your purpose, the reason you exist, which I think is deep within all of us, in the form of a seed was put in us when we were made, when we were formed in our mother's womb, and that seed starts to get nurtured and turns into a tree that then bears fruit and so on, you know. So to me, success is you walking out everything you were created to be, you being the fullness of who you were made to be. Now, why is it mostly rated on a financial level? This is just my opinion. I don't think it's mostly rated on that, but I think that if you are prospering as a being, it will overflow into everything you're doing. You cannot prosper internally and not have a prosperous marriage, a prosperous body, a prosperous family life, a prosperous bank account. I think it's a natural overflow, organic overflow. Prosperity on the inside will always lead to prosperity on the outside. And I think that when we get born again, we receive the fullness, the Christ seed, the fullness there, which is prosperous, which is prosperity. The other reason I think talking about finances is important is because most people give their life to a job, which is the system of this world. They give their life 50 hours, 60 hours a week to a company, an organization, or to a certain method of making money, which I think can be very mammon dominated. I feel like the marketplace for a long time has been the church of mammon, and that might be a subject for another day. But there is a contrast where Jesus is talking about mammon and God, and you will serve one and not the other. You'll be loyal to one and you'll despise the other, So as a purpose coach, I've met a lot of people who will say, I can't fulfill what God's called me to do because I don't have the resources, which to me does not make sense, and then we start exploring this whole pattern, right? Like a weekday and a weekend, is that a heavenly concept? I don't think so. A 9-to-5 workday, is that a heavenly concept? I don't think so. So when people are giving so much of their life to earn this money so they can survive, that's why I think it's such an important subject to touch on. What do you think, Robbie?
Oh, I think you've nailed it, bro. That's brilliant. It's hard to add to that, but I would say that, what is success? That's obviously individual to each person. There is no one single definition of success. It looks different to everyone, so I can't kind of give you a straight answer to that. But why is it mostly rated on a financial level? Or I think maybe another way of thinking about it is, why is financial prosperity often connected to the concept of success? And for me, the reason why, bro, Sean, and I'm speaking directly to you now, is because financial success doesn't happen by accident. Dude, it takes discipline, it takes focus, it takes planning, it takes sacrifice, it takes obedience. It takes, it takes a lot. And I think, like the Bible says, that God has given us power to create wealth. So as we leverage that power, oftentimes it results into a degree of wealth. And so if someone doesn't have wealth, a lot of the times it's because they haven't leveraged the power they have to create wealth. So does that mean that we judge them or think less of them or anything? No, it just means that when someone has that, you often associate in your mind, and a lot of the time subconsciously, okay, this person's obviously disciplined, focused, has a good work ethic, has turned up, has shaken hands, has looked people in the eye, has taken risks. So in the parable of the talents, certainly the guy with more money was considered more successful and was promoted and given more responsibility. So the master actually measured someone on their financial level, and if it's good enough for him to do it, then it's good enough for me to do it.
And I think if we really look at that parable, it would trigger a lot of people, because the one that had the least, even that was taken and then given to the one that had more, which is really, really interesting. I do want to say this because someone brought up, how do you explain success but not rich? And I think that word rich is really interesting, because we always like to compare what we have with people that we deem to have a lot more than us. But in reality, most of you that are watching this or that will listen to this are in the top 10, 20% of the world. I grew up in India and I saw rich people, I saw middle class, and then I saw slums, and I saw people who the government wasn't going to save anybody's life there, right? And so there are people on this planet that would switch economic status with you, just like this. Like, you're already in the top 20, top 15 in the world if we zoom out. And I think understanding that you are already in such a position, then growing with your Father, you will be faithful to that. You will govern that. You will steward that. And then you will start to use that, your finances, to start to impact all over the place. Most believers that I have met that have money, that have wealth, that have success, they are filtering that into all parts of the world in some capacity. This is the most amazing thing about believers who have resources. They are impacting, usually in secret, they are impacting a lot of people, a lot of lives. And that's what I would say to people that are a bit, about the finance element, is that the more you have, the more you get to also give away, the more you get to use to change nations, you know, which I think is important.
I love that, bro. That's great.
Well, there's more stuff, man. You know, we talked about Andrew Tate. We talked about Joe Rogan podcast, and I think it's good for us to go into some of this, right? Because these guys, they go all over the place. So let me pull up this what I wrote. We're going to talk about, and I think we covered a little.
Yep, do it, bro.
But maybe we already touched on the orphan thinking, because you talked about the prodigal son. Obviously, was thinking like an orphan, but even the son who stayed home. I remember preaching a message once called "The Son Who Stayed Home," on how he was also like an orphan, right? He didn't know his dad. He didn't know what he had. We talked about guilt, but now maybe we can move into dreaming and co-creating with God, man. Like, I think that's such a big subject.
Oh, bro, that's tough.
You know, I find myself now going into a new phase in a realm of dreaming with God. So let me just set the foundation, and then you take it, right? So I began this journey in 2008, just seeking instruction, right? Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. And once he told me what to do, I'm like, when should I do it? And how should I do it? And what time should I do it? Like, it was so like, okay, I'll just follow what you say. And then as time went, I had a real significant moment once, because when I got saved, I'd feel the presence of God, tangible presence all the time. And one of the things I would feel is like a wind on my hair, and it would be like a zzzz, and I allowed that to lead all my decisions, man, for about 2.5 years. So I'd just be like, Lord, if you want me to do this, let me know. And if I felt that, boom, I'm going. If I didn't feel that, I wouldn't go. And I know it sounds funny now, but for a child, that was exactly what I needed, you know?
Yeah.
About 2.5 years in, I started to realize, man, I haven't felt the wind in like a few months. And I started to freak out, you know? And then part of me is like, what did I do wrong, God? Have I left you? Am I not praying right? You know, and I'm doing all the stuff. And then I just feel the Lord say to me, no, you've outgrown it. You don't need it anymore. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, what you used to be guided by here will now be guided within you. And it was such a crazy moment for me, because I knew it was true and I was excited about that. But then I was scared, and I was also like, oh man, I'm not a kid anymore. It was an interesting transition into learning to co-labor with God, co-create with God, co-heir with God, right? I'll say one last thing and then I'll hand it over. I have a whiteboard here in my office, right? And this whiteboard, I would dream with him, but I would still be looking for his input beyond mine. But in the last few years, it's been real interesting staring at this whiteboard, having God ask me, what would you do? What would you create? What would you write? If it was just up to you, what would that look like, son? And it's been real amazing to let that start to flourish from within me, you know? So can you touch on that? You're dreaming, you're co-creating with God?
Oh, bro, this is so good. And I feel so much is on this. And I love how you talked about that transition, because I went through a very similar thing of feeling I did something wrong when I transitioned through the next phase of maturity. The Father started dealing with me in an entirely different way, almost to the point where I didn't recognize him anymore. And I had to adjust to meet him where he was at and the way he was now dealing with me. And I think people often find that transition quite confusing. But bro, okay, I want to ask permission to throw a very wild idea out there. Like, let's just zoom way out, and I'm going to throw a wild one out there. And I'm not even going to answer it. I'm just going to leave this with some people, okay? I'm warning you, bro. This is wild. So, you know, was death part of God's original intention?
No. Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah. I'm asking you and everyone else on here. So, okay, no. Okay, so we can all agree to that, because death came as a consequence of sin, and sin wasn't God's plan or his intention. Where would everyone have gone if nobody died? And everyone who ever lived had babies, and think about the exponential growth curve of the human population of all time. Where would everyone have gone? Okay, so this planet can't sustain people just, you know, growing forever and ever. If there was never any deaths in all of history, what would our population have been? Okay, now think about that thought, and think about this. Jesus said, the things I have done, you will do and greater, right? Through him, all things were made. In him, all things consist, right? So he was a co-creator of all the universes. and he's saying to us, what I have done, you will do, we often limit that statement to what he did in his physical form on earth.
Mm.
And it's not true. Okay, so if no one was ever meant to die, now let me just park that concept. So what I'm saying in essence is that it would have been our job to expand the garden, i.e., bring what is in the domain that we're in into other realms, dimensions, planets, perhaps even maybe, because if God created planets and he's put his words in our mouth and his words created all things and he's entrusted us with that infinite power and with his spirit, that means we have that capacity to do what he's done. And actually that's his desire as a father. So what he did is he laid out an example for us in the process of creation to replicate. So when you look at the word Eden, and this is where I go even deeper, and bro, this is fresh. This is like a 1 week old revelation for me. I've found a lot of value in the Hebrew letters, and a lot of people who haven't been exposed to that maybe find it a bit weird and say, well, why would you bother with that? And for me, mostly because I'm a visual thinker, every Hebrew letter was at once a picture. Like if you think of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, they were all pictures. So language in the olden days were pictures, and pictures tell 1,000 words. So the word Eden is made up of 3 letters. And I'm going to tell you what the pictures are for those letters, because it tells you what God's intention was in the positioning of man. Okay? So Eden is 3 letters, a ayin, which is an I, a dalet, which is like a gate or a doorway or a portal even, and a nun, which is a seed manifesting. Like, so the ayin represents the intangible reality, the spirit world, the realm of possibility, the dreams. It's the I. Like, think about it. It's like the concepts. It's the potential. It's the pregnancy in the spirit world of what could be. The dalet is a door, right? Which is, it means it's a place through which something is displayed. And then, or it's a place of government, because a gate was always a place of government in ancient times. And then the nun represents the material, tangible world. It represents the manifestation. Like, think about a seed growing into a tree. That's the nun. So each of these letters in and of themselves tell a story, but when you then combine them, it tells this amazing story. So it's like the infinite realm, God's realm, the realm of possibility, coming through us as a gate of government to manifest into creation. So there's, what I'm saying is, he doesn't want to be the only creator, is that he positioned us to display another realm into creation. That was his intention, and that is our role, and that role never ceased. It never stopped. And so I find it interesting that the man who's got a picture of Mars in its current state and a picture of Mars in its populated green state on his office wall is also the guy that's pretty much got the most money on Earth. Because his mission and his thinking and his dream is to go and populate other planets. Now, to a lot of people, that might seem like, dude, that's so unrealistic. But I believe that matter and material is subject to us as creator beings, because we carry the infinite spirit of God that caused all things to come into existence within us, to which all created things respond, because it's subject to the government of the spirit that resides in us. So I know this is wild, bro, and I know it's a big dream, and I can talk to you about my earthly dreams, but I'm talking about my dream for us as a species, and what God's dream is for us as a species, and our role and our function in the bigger context of the bigger picture. And then we can chunk it down to like, oh yeah, what's my dream for the next year or two? But I think that big, and I think about the repercussions of man's decisions on the planet and the fall and what that's led us to, and how it's about a journey back to the original intent, and death wasn't part of the original intent, and expansion and growth and multiplication was. So, hey, man, I might be a little bit wild on that. I did ask for your permission, but yeah, there's some of my thoughts.
Bro, I love it. And that's why I was quiet, just letting you go for it, you know. It is a stretch for many people, but I think it's a good stretch. And it's something we explore. That if you're listening to this and you're like, what do you go and explore? You know, explore this for yourself instead of staying stuck in what other people have tried to box you in, right? So let me ask you this, Robbie. So I remember we've had a lot of chats about different kinds of things, and once you said to me, I think there are people that are operating in stuff unknowingly. So when we talk about this, then you're talking about the doorway, right, or the portal, and engaging this other realm. Do you think that a lot of people, a lot of believers, maybe unbelievers, but do you think like a lot of believers are already engaging it without knowing that they're doing that? You know what I mean?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Like, yeah, like when you're born again from above. What's above? Another dimension. Seated in Christ, where? In heavenly places. Well, joined to the Lord, one spirit with him. So you're one spirit with God. And Jesus prayed, our Father, who art where? In heaven. So we're already one with him. We're already seated in him. We're already born again from another dimension. We are spirit beings because we're made in his image. And the thing is, bro, revelation isn't new knowledge. It's a remembering of something that you already know to be true. And so sometimes it's just our salvation is the process, or part of salvation is the process of your mind catching up with the reality that already exists. So it's not about repositioning yourself in another dimension. It's about coming into the awareness of where you already exist, who you're already joined with, and what's possible for you. And yeah, I'm trying to say these things in a way that doesn't kind of freak people out, because I've spent years thinking about this stuff and now I'm blurting it all out in 5 minutes. But yeah.
This is great. I think this is great. I think it's important. I think many people in the comments already would agree and are also on the journey of exploring that, you know?
Yeah.
Being a co-creator in a whole new way of thinking about it. So
yeah, what about you, bro? Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I know that
let's carry this on. Let's keep going here. So let me ask you this question, right? So, because there are a lot of people, even in say the mystical space, so I'm just using that term loosely, but who will say we have all this authority, ability, but maybe don't really have any fruit. Let's not say don't have like massive fruit, but many don't have any fruit, right? So let me ask you this question. So how does one really start to move in this, go deep and see it as a reality, not just as someone else's knowledge, but as their reality, you know, their experience?
That's really good, man. Like, obviously I can't speak for a lot of people, and fruit is measured in different ways. Like I know people who spend a long time just engaging in those dimensions, and they're unlocking all sorts of things that has massive repercussions on the earth that no one could possibly trace back to them or what they did in those dimensions. But what I would say is this, that the same way that it was important for Moses to hold his hands up, and what he did determined Joshua's results on the battlefield, in the same way, what we do or don't do in the spirit is going to have a direct repercussion in what happens on the earth. And both are important. I think when people don't have fruit is because they've discounted the value of one realm. And that's why this picture of Eden is so beautiful, because it talks about the intangible reality and the tangible reality, and making heaven. Like Jesus didn't say in heaven as it is in heaven. He said on earth as it is in heaven. And if we misplace our perspective to be overly balanced on one reality or the other, or discounting or swapping out the value of one for the other, both are equally valuable, both are equally valuable dimensions. But this is what we've got to understand, is which one existed before the other one. Obviously the spiritual dimension existed prior to the physical dimension, and so therefore the physical dimension is subject to that which caused it to come into existence. And so when we move things in the spirit, it supersedes what's going on in the earth, and it has massive repercussions, bro. I've seen it too many times for it to be faith for me anymore. It's not even a thing of faith. Like, it's just knowledge now, but it took me a very long time. In the beginning, it was faith. And I did see a lot of things in the mystical movement that I didn't like, but I also saw a lot of things that I did like. And for me, I made a conscious choice to focus on what I liked and the places where I did see fruit versus the places where I didn't. And that doesn't mean we can't discern and say, hey, that's not good fruit, I don't like it. But for me, I've always, and maybe I was just I've always been this way, is I'll look for the good in people, and I'll look for the good, and I'll look for what is working, and I'll honor that. And as a result, I'll learn from it. So I think, to answer your question, bro, if we get too carried away with practical, concrete, physical schedules, budgets, finances, plans, like, bro, what are you doing? But if you get too carried away with, oh, we're just going to sit in the Spirit all day, both of those are equally foolish mistakes. You need both. We need plans and schedules and budgets. Nehemiah had them, bro. Like, he told the king straight up, I need this many days, this many resources. You go here, you go there. We need you to do this. He's a very practical leader, but it started off in the Spirit because he realized that the Father put something in his heart and he prayed. So for me, it's about beginning in that realm, not beginning in the practical, tangible realm, beginning in the infinite realm, where we already are seated and observing, so that we can see, where did Christ see what the Father was doing? Well, not in this realm, because our Father is in heaven, like he said. So he gave us full access to that realm to explore it, and from that knowledge, build according to the pattern.
So, and that's kind of what I was saying, right? Like, I'm not, I wasn't trying to diss any mystics or anything.
Not at all.
Not at all. It's easy. We don't just get to talk about it. We get to actually walk in it and live it. And maybe I can ask you for some examples soon. But if we come back here to what you just said, right, and your the blueprint, right, building according to what you're given on your mountain, the pattern you see on your mountain. So what does that look like for you? And then maybe I can share what that looks like for me currently. That might be really helpful for people, you know?
Yeah, I love it, man. Bro, I've noticed that, like, I've been hugely inspired with the story of Moses. Anyone that knows me knows that. But he went up into the mountain to receive something from God, and it was very clear, and it was very, like, dude, it was architecture from another dimension. Like, this is huge. And to me, that serves as an example of there are patterns for our day that do not come from Moses's day. Do you, like, bro, how does this make you feel? There are people equally important to Moses walking the earth today. I think there's a lot of people that might get triggered by that, but bro, I believe it. I believe that there are people that are just as important, and maybe even more important, in terms of what God is wanting to administrate into creation. Moses was obedient and observant and faithful in his time. And so for me, what does the process look like? But as you will notice in that story, just before I go into my process, is that he took that blueprint, communicated it, and then there were people that received the skills to execute that blueprint that Moses didn't have. So he was interdependent on others for the execution of the divine commandment. So it's never a singular process. He also got oversight on his insight. When he had the burning bush encounter, he went to the leaders and he's like, this is what happened. And so for me, whenever I receive a blueprint of some kind, which I do, it comes visually, it comes as an inspiration, it comes as a thought, as an idea, as a conversation with Joseph. Next minute, Joseph says, hey, I feel like maybe you're going to build a city one day. And it resonates in my heart. I'm like, yep, that's of God. I'm in. You know, it's literally, when you're ready, when you're seeking, when you're open, it will come into your awareness. Don't judge how it comes into your awareness, whether it's through a book, through a conversation, through a dream, through a vision, through a prophetic word. Who cares, man? Like, discern the origin, no matter what the channel is, discern the origin. Whether it was through a direct interaction, you have the ability to discern where it comes from. And so for me, no matter where it comes from, I sense and feel and see, because in my heart, I'm asking this question from a place of like hunger and desire. The desire unlocks the revelation for me. And I see these patterns, and bro, like, you know, I trade into stuff. Like, I will give money sometimes, or I'll give something valuable. And I don't need to go into all the stuff I've given away. With my question, I'll be like, Father, show me what your intention is for this. Because it's a trade. And I'm saying, I actually am really hungry to know. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is. And that may not be the process for everyone. But for me, I have found that the more I demonstrate to the Father my hunger and willingness an ability to take responsibility, the more he releases the blueprint to me. And from there, I talk to someone about it, whether it's Joseph or whether it's Ian or Marius or whoever I'm in relationship with, or with Jazz, or like whoever. Hey, this is what I saw. What do you think? I trust the people around me, like Moses did. Yeah. So anyway, bro, I feel like I've done enough talking for a little while. I really want to hear
that's so good. Love it.
This.
I love it. Let me just hit a couple of things. I love that the example you gave of you can't just budgets and all the practical stuff only, and then you can't just sit down and engage only. It's a fusion, right? Like that's why the podcast is Fuse Life. That's why, like, it's this hybrid understanding, right? Both together, and not this or that, but and what does it look like fused into one, So I really love that. The other thing I want to say, somebody asked, how do we bridge the gap for people to lead them into the new? Well, Samantha, this is how we do it. We have conversation, conversation then leads to more conversation, and then leads to more, and eventually it leads to all this action that becomes a byproduct, So hopefully this is helping you guys and you're enjoying this as much as I'm enjoying this. It just feels like me and my friend having a chat here, which is great.
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
And a lot of what you said has become a part of my process too. One of the things I had to learn was that it takes time. Very rarely do I go and sit down and engage and get it all there, And years ago, that used to really frustrate me. But I've come to learn that the chewing, the meditating in the heart with questions of what is this going to look like? What are we doing, Papa? Those kind of questions, this keep going on in the background, and I suddenly find a glimpse here and a puzzle piece there and a this here. And it's like I get to put it all together over time. And I'm in one of those processes right now for my next season. And it's been a good 3-4 weeks of different pieces coming together. And I would like to tell people that most of the time it doesn't happen where you just go sit down like a vending machine in it, And one of the reasons I think it's like that is because we become the carrier. We become the person that's required for whatever is about to come through us. And I think a lot of times we devalue that process, that time of I am in the becoming as this thing then comes through me, So, man, I love what you said, and very similar even for me. And I take a lot to my wife. She's a great voice of wisdom for me, a great sounding board. And like you, I have a few people, and obviously you are one too now, that we've been talking a lot about, hey, man, I'm seeing this. Or I think that, what do you think? And it's huge, And so I love that. And I love we're on the same buzz.
It's so good, bro. It's so good. And I think like where I'm excited, coming back to Samantha's question, and I just honor Samantha because a couple of years ago, she sent me an email with this prophetic word. And today, a lot of that stuff I'm walking in it. And it's amazing that when we're all in that realm and we're all one with him, we all come into awareness of what we carry, what other people carry. And I think not getting to this insulated place that it's about me and my purpose and me, my, and I am being so focused, because I think that oftentimes gets us stuck.
Yes.
And it's like thinking of this in the context of the collective. So how do we step into the new? I think for me, I would say, why don't we ponder that question that I asked, which is what if the roles that certain people and not only individuals, but people groups like Israel, like Moses, what if there was some blueprints that were equally important that God's wanting to birth today, that are as monumental and as important as what Moses did? And what if that was a framework as an example for us of what collaboration, shared financial resources, engagement in heavenly blueprints, and a place of interdependence where a community came together, joined their economic power around a divine blueprint and built it? What would that look like today? And I think most of the church wouldn't recognize that, bro, because we want to listen to sermons and we want to sing songs. And I don't discount the value of that stuff. Great, let's sing the songs, let's preach the sermons. But once we're done, let's get started, because that's 5% of the scope of our responsibility as the body of Christ. There's so much more for us to do. And so how we start doing the new is, man, just like go just dream big and think wild and think outside of the confines of what's been. And that's easier said than done. But, you know, sometimes there's those first few crazy people that all the people in history that we thought were crazy. Like I think the other day, the Catholic Church finally admitted the earth wasn't flat, you know, because the guy who said it wasn't flat got hung or something. I don't know the details, but but the pioneers and the first, you know, those people, they always get hung. They go through a lot of trouble, but not for long, because after a while, if we get enough people thinking in terms of what's new and what's coming and what's for our day and what the blueprints and concepts and processes are for our day, the more of us that start thinking along that way, the more natural and normal it's going to become.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad we're talking about it, and I'm glad that this we talked about more, and this becomes normal. It's just to explore this, you know. Yeah, man.
Fully, bro.
How you doing for time? Are you good?
I mean, I'm good, bro. We should probably wrap it up in the next 10 to 15, but I'm good. I don't need to rush off. But as always, I feel like we've just gotten started and just getting warmed up. But what else are you thinking, bro? What else is on your mind?
Yeah, well, in the description, I put masculinity, femininity, and I put community, you know, these three things. And maybe some of these are too big to just start and open right now.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've given people an hour and a half of things to process, and maybe we should leave those topics for another time.
Okay.
But up to you, bro.
Yes.
Up to you.
Come on, guys, give us some feedback. How's this been? How's this been for you? I feel like this is the first of many. My dream was always to have like a Joe Rogan style podcast. Now they get around some weed and whiskey and they just shoot the breeze on all kinds of stuff, right? Now we're not getting around weed and whiskey here, but I need some dance partners. It's actually really hard to find dance partners who don't mind talking about anything and everything and exploring everything. Like it's actually not as easy as you would think to find dance partners. So I'm really thankful that Robbie and I will probably do this quite a few times, I'm hoping. Right?
Yeah, bro, let's start.
Yeah, and I think there's so many subjects that we can touch on and go into, which we will, you know. And I'm really thankful, man, Robbie. Like, it was supernatural how we connected, and just in a short time, it's just awesome. I'm so excited, and I'm thankful you live in New Zealand, man.
Yeah, me too, bro. I'm just down the road now. But yeah, hey, thankful for you, Joseph. And I'm really excited to hear more of your voice, because you've been so humble and asking all these guests, you know, 140 or whatever it is podcasts, like hearing other people's stories and hearing other people's voices. And I'm excited for your audience and, you know, everyone who's listening to hear a lot more about what you've got to say, bro, because when you speak, I'm listening, man. And so is everyone else. So we want to hear more of your voice, bro. And yeah, I'm looking forward to more of these discussions. And thanks for everyone who's been on listening. And I might not be able to see you, but we certainly feel your presence in this process. So thanks, bro.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Is there anything you want to say to these guys as a last message, just as we wrap up?
Yeah, man. Like, I think go easy on yourself if you're early on in the process. I haven't, you know, it's taken me a lot of years of journeying to unlock some of what's going on. And sometimes we can compare ourselves to people. And there's been so many times where, like back in the day, where it was really hard and I felt stuck and frustrated and confused and disappointed. And so if you're there, don't be hard on yourself. That's what I'll have to say. Be kind to yourself. Be good to yourself. You know, that's my thoughts, bro. What about you?
Yeah, awesome. And I just also second that, and I want to honor all you guys, because you all carry something, you know, and you guys that asked questions and brought up subjects, you all carry stuff. You're doing it in your nations, like Sean, you're doing it in your nation. A lot of you are doing it in South Africa and in Australia, and obviously in New Zealand as well. And you're all doing it to some capacity. We're all starting to move deeper. And I just want to encourage you to embrace the maturing journey, you know, so wherever you're at, whatever that looks like, just to embrace that maturing journey, the fusion of the spiritual, the unseen, but then also the practical and the seen, and allowing them to marry one another, and just embrace the maturing journey, which excites me the most, you know, because when I look at Romans 8, that's waiting for creation is groaning for all these sons to be revealed. This maturing process that we don't see enough, I think, in traditional Christianity, that Robbie and I have a massive heart for, you know, and so we just want to encourage you to pursue, to dream, to explore, you know, and obviously you can connect with us at any point. You can DM Robbie, you can DM me. There's a link to some free training that you can click on. It's a 4-part series on provision that I made that a lot of people loved. So if you want to go down that part, that training's there. But we're going to do more of this. And so we're both just encouraging you guys to keep flying, keep moving, and we're all going to do this together. So, yeah.
Sweet. Good night, everyone.
All right. Bless you guys. We'll see you on the next one.